arrived at Williams College being incredibly sure of who I was and what I wanted to do in life. I was an activist. I knew for sure that I was going to go into international law, and that would be the platform from which I launched an illustrious career, maybe in the UN, maybe via any other number of sort of intergovernmental organizations, and I would solve the world's problems from there. Then I took Cheryl Shank's international law class my sophomore year and realized that I had no fluency or facility, actually, for the field of international law. But I wouldn't figure out why that was until a little bit farther along in my journey at Williams. All I knew was that I was standing at the bottom, and I could see the mountaintop of all these problems that were happening in the world. For me at Williams, the issue that I was most active on, and which I continue to be active on as a professional, was the issue of sexual violence. But I kept detouring from that mountaintop path into other fields. I thought it was going to be international law, but it turned out I kept moving into sociology, I kept moving into psychology, into foreign languages, into bio for non-majors. But all of them were helpful, and I needed all of them. And it took me, again, a little while to understand why that was. So, with much thanks to Professor Devadas and his students for preparing this. If you haven't seen it, it's available on Professor Devadas' website. But it's a map of, on the left-hand side, all of the majors that are available at Williams, or at least the categories of majors that are available at Williams. And on the right-hand side, all of the fields that people in those majors have gone into. And I think what this picture shows us so beautifully is that liberal arts majors, it's not just that we can do any of those things, but what I'm trying to argue, and that I think the liberal arts education that Williams sets us up so well for, is that we have to do those things. If we are looking to solve what we're calling intractable social problems, we have to have access to all of this different kinds of knowledge that comes from truly gaining language, gaining facility, gaining comfort with lots of different fields. So it's not just about subject matter mastery. And don't get me wrong, we get very good here at Williams with subject matter mastery. But it's about being able to communicate with and understand and truly embrace other fields that are available to us. This is a diagram from the Centers for Disease Control, and fundamentally what this diagram is about is ways of knowing and how to use evidence to make good decisions about all manner of things. But essentially what it's saying is that we need to access all of these different kinds of ways of knowing in order to make those decisions. And that's what I hadn't figured out when I was so invested in one field of study and one way of knowing, was that it was not sufficient to solve a huge problem like sexual violence. I needed the language of other fields. I needed the knowledge of other fields. I needed the experience, the lived experience of people in other situations from my own. The core of what I do, which professionally I work at Massachusetts' largest rape crisis center. We serve about 1.3 million people in eastern Massachusetts. But the core of what I do is about community work. And it's about engaging communities and figuring out how to pull people together into a common community. And I think as I've sort of been exploring what Jack Sawyer's legacy is at Williams, it's been about understanding that Williams, more than being an experience, is a community that we can all share. And it was about expanding access to that community for different folks. One thing that I've learned from my work professionally is that for community work to really work, it has to be related to a shared identity. And that goes two ways. One is that for us to really be invested in a community and for things to really work, we have to feel like our identity is shaped by being a part of that community. Now, I saw how many people today showed up with some kind of purple clothing on, right? I saw purple ties, I saw purple sweaters, I saw purple cow print socks. I can spot a Williams alum from a mile away in the subway, and I will chase them down and talk to them. So I think we have a lock on feeling like our identity is shaped by being a part of this community. But the other piece of this is that we have to feel that the community is shaped by our being a part of it, that it's responsive to and aware of and flexible about changing because of our impact on it and our impact in it. And that is part of the difference that we'll make. That is part of the reason that we need to have this feeling like we're able to communicate with and have that sort of shared value zone in that center of those ways of knowing. I like to think that because Williamstown doesn't have a lot of actual intersections, that we need to make intersections of our own, even if they're just conceptual. And what we rely on is learning the language of different fields to understand that. So I think that we are all familiar with this image. It is Mark Hopkins on one end of a log and a student on another. I did a little research prior to this, not about the history of this sculpture, but about whether my degree could be revoked for admitting here, which I will publicly, that I have no idea actually what that quote means. But I have an idea of what it means. So with apologies to everyone, this is my interpretation of Mark Hopkins on a log. What I think that it means is that faculty are here and fully invested in the learning process, fully engaged in the learning process with students. Faculty are not up on a pedestal. They're not stuck behind the podium in front of a huge lecture hall, with the possible exception of Psych 101. And they're not in a computer screen. They're there with us, engaged in the learning process. We're holding one another accountable for our teaching and for our learning. And that's at the very core of this liberal arts experience. One thing, though, that I think is really critical to think about is, though, that we are a residential liberal arts college. So it's not about like coming, I come to work and I feel engaged with my colleagues, and we're all fully invested, and we're all sort of working towards common goals and holding each other accountable, but I don't live with them, mercifully. There's something about a residential experience at a liberal arts college that calls on faculty in a very unique position to do something more than respond as colleagues. What you're looking at right now is a Wordle. It's a very cool tool that you can find online. What it lets you do is aggregate a whole bunch of text, and the text that comes up, or the words that come up most commonly, are shown largest in the Wordle. I've had the very great privilege over the last couple of years to be working with Williams on policy related to sexual violence, cultural change related to sexual violence. And what you're looking at is a product of some of that engagement with Williams. And what you're looking at is words from faculty here at Williams. And this particular group of faculty undertook the very difficult exercise of exploring the issue of sexual violence at Williams. And what they articulated in that session was their frustration with the fact that sexual violence is too often pushed into a student life issue, a student conduct issue, essentially a 4 p.m. to 8 a.m. issue. And they were saying, I understand that this is impacting my students. I understand that these young people that I care very much about are suffering in ways that are very tangible to me. And I need to engage with the issue of this. I need to engage with the culture in which we're all interacting. I recognize that I have this very critical sphere of influence, and I am looking for a way to have a little more conversation about this. And I think what I'm so proud of is that these are the words of the athletic faculty that are engaging in this issue. And it's the athletic faculty who chose to dive down deeper and say, what is it that we can do in that sphere of influence? I know from my time here as a student that there have been and there continue to be discussions about which faculty carry the weight of shaping the Williams community, which faculty are contributing in productive ways, which faculty are not contributing in productive ways. And I think what this highlights is a really excellent example of how we need faculty to engage on this issue of sexual violence. A colleague of mine in her dissertation research at Brown University is studying the economic impact of sexual violence on survivors. And it's an amazing study, really the first of its kind. But one of the things that she found in that study is what's called, in sort of very clean research language, shifts in trajectory. And what that details is that for people who've experienced sexual violence, they experience shifts in trajectory. They're no longer able to continue the path that they were on. Concretely, what that means is people losing their college experience. They're having to leave communities like Williams. And maybe they finish college someplace else, maybe they finish it at a community college, maybe they don't finish at all. And that is heartbreaking, because 50 years ago, I don't think that Jack Sawyer, the community that he envisioned, would be one that people would systematically have to leave because of these shifts in trajectory. That's not fair. That's not the difference that as we expand access to this community, that's not the difference that I think we have expected to make. And we need everyone to engage on this issue in very, very critical ways. The way that I think we need the faculty is not about teaching us the content matter knowledge of how to read research, how to understand scholarly fields on it, but to really engage with us as members, active members of the community. I think we've all valued that as part of our Williams experience and continue to value that as part of our Williams experience. This is effortful. Intentional community is effortful. Engaging with people as part of something that we all belong to and all feel an ownership stake in takes a lot of work. Don't get me wrong on that. One year, just sort of as a way to illustrate that, one year I was probably up really late studying and decided that I did not have the energy to hike Mountain Day, that I was going to drive to Mountain Day, which is totally defeating the purpose of it. And so the spirit of Williams College punished me for doing that by, actually, I didn't know the way well enough, and I went to the wrong mountain for Mountain Day. Took a wrong turn, I went to the wrong mountain. And I think that that's a good way to illustrate that, there is no easy way for us to get there. Uncomfortable learning is another Williams value that I think that we have all had the opportunity to think about and embrace. We're going to have to make a difference, we're going to have to embrace fields that we're not as comfortable with, language that we're not as comfortable with, subject areas that we would probably prefer not to delve into were it not for example, divisional requirements, were it not for the request of other members of this community that matters to us and to which we belong as full partners. We have to engage in that uncomfortable learning in order to make a difference. There are lots of statistics about sexual violence on college campuses, but the thing that's so irksome to me is that they're all phrased in terms of X number of students will experience sexual violence during their time as an undergraduate institution. That's all of how those statistics are phrased. And I do not accept that. I do not accept the phrasing of those statistics because I don't think of sexual violence as an intractable, unsolvable problem. It might be our Everest. I will not go so far as to say it is quite as easy to climb as a Mount Greylock. It might be our Everest. But I do think that we can get there. I don't know what Williams will look like in 50 years. I've heard some wonderful ideas about who we'll be and how we'll be learning and what we'll be learning. But I do know that this is a problem that is solvable for us. And it's by creating continuously that intentional community as full partners that's how we'll make a difference. Thank you so much.